Before we start, Andy, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsors, Money Farm. Now, Money Farm are the largest digital wealth manager in Europe, and they create portfolios of ETFs for their clients. They're incredibly cheap and ideal for somebody who's wanting to get into investing, and perhaps for more experienced investors who don't actually want to run their own money anymore. Now, they will even offer to run the first £20,000 of any of our listeners' portfolio absolutely free if they enter the code MTTM20K into the website at moneyfarm.com. For more information, check out their website. But for now, Andy, let's get back on with the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 173 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how are you doing, my friend? You looking good?
I'm feeling good, Andy. Tired slightly because it's been the end of tax year rush, and I don't know if anybody, if you don't work in the world of finance, and obviously you might not know that the end of tax year rush is quite a big thing. And so a lot of work gets done. But I don't feel as bad as I have done in the past, because the way things work online now, we do a lot of our work ahead of schedule. So quite pleased the end of tax year's out the way. Looking forward to the rest of the year, as it were, so we can start planning. How about you? How's your week been, Andy? I know you've been somewhere, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been away for a couple of days. So my week was really, really busy at the start of the week, and it wasn't best planning, but yeah, we were going away for a couple of days, just come back actually, and feel refreshed and tired like you, but for different reasons. Yeah, we've been on a bit of a UK safari with some family, and it was down in Port Lympne in the southeast of England, and yeah, we've been watching lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! And it was great fun. So yeah, recommend it to anyone.
Did they have giraffes, Andy? Because giraffes are my favourite animal. If you had to pick a favourite animal, it is definitely a giraffe.
This is proof that we don't talk too much off air, because we like to try and keep it as spontaneous as possible. We don't like to script anything like that. But that's really interesting you should say, because we stayed in a place called Giraffe Cottage, and we were overlooking the reserve, specifically in the part of the park where you can observe and enjoy the giraffes. So unfortunately this time of year the giraffes aren't out for much of the time because it's still a bit cold and stuff, but we did get our own personal tour of the giraffe house, and we spent half an hour with the giraffes watching them feed. And
I thought for 1 second, Andy, you were going to say you got your own personal giraffe. I thought this is awesome. Breakfast served on the head of a giraffe or something like that. Yeah, so you got your own tour of a giraffe, did you?
Got our own tour of the giraffe house, yes. We got to spend 25 minutes on a private tour, just the family, feeding and looking and touching and the giraffes. It was amazing, genuinely amazing. My eldest daughter said it was the best day of her life, and can we go there every day after school to see Gary the giraffe? So.
Well, there you go. I have to say, this isn't a podcast about giraffes, but I really like giraffes, because when I got married, we actually went away on our honeymoon, and we ended up going on safari for a period of time. And giraffes, just when you see a giraffe run, it's like comedy, because they look like an animal that has been drawn by a child. It shouldn't work, but it does. And when you head towards them in a Jeep, just driving along, they stand very still and their head just slowly turns watching you. They say you can never outstare a giraffe. And then suddenly they just panic and gallop off in this waving of legs and everything. So they just make me laugh. Anyway, enough about giraffes. We're here for the money stuff. So
yeah,
I'm going to tell you what's on the podcast this week. I've decided to take a break from investing commentary. We've done quite a bit of investment commentary the last few weeks, partly down to demand, but it's been crazy out there. It's the Wild West in the equity markets at the moment. So I thought we'll give everybody a bit of a break from that, and we're going to do a couple of pieces that have been inspired by reader questions or people emailing me or contacting me on social media. Now, the first one is going to be the maths behind compound interest. It's critical if you're going to save money or invest, and to understand that. So somebody asked me, it was Gavin actually, he suggested it would be a good topic to talk about the maths behind compound investing, given how important it is. I'm going to talk about a scam, or something you should try not to do in order to avoid being scammed. I know you love a scam story, Andy, so
I do, yeah, it's my personal favourite.
I thought I'd throw that in there. And another one, the final piece, is how to manage financial goals. It was a question that somebody pinged into me via email, so I thought I'd pick that up with some some of my own musings on how you achieve those goals. I think this week we'll go with the compound interest. And if you know what compound interest, you might even skip this section. But compound interest is important, and there's no shame in not understanding what it is, because I don't think enough is made of it when you're at school. And also, even if it was, who honestly remembers anything from school? So actually, just before I go on, if it sounds a bit echoey today, I'm in a slightly different location. I'm actually at my brother's house, just house sitting for a bit, and I don't know if anybody remembers, but it's that house where the lights turn on and off on their own. So it's about 9 o'clock at night at the moment. It's dark, and if I get distracted, it's because these lights go on and off on their own, which is quite off-putting when you're on your own in the house. But the compound interest is a key thing in finance. Now, I want to explain how it works and compare it to something called simple interest. Now, if you're thinking about compound interest, the way to think of it is it's interest on your original investment. So if you're saving money, it's the interest you get on the original amount you put in, but plus all the interest that has been accumulated over time on top of that interest. So you've got interest being paid on the original amount and interest being paid on the interest you've already been paid. That's the compounding. It's like a snowball. So it starts rolling and it gets bigger and bigger as you go down the hill. Now, another way to think of it, it's interest on interest. That's the very short, snappy way of remembering what compound interest is. Now, when you hear about something called simple interest, this is very different. It doesn't really exist as such in the financial world. But to give you an example, simple interest works. Let's say, Andy, you put £10,000 in a bank account, and you had an account that was very generous and paid you 5% a year of interest. Now, what would happen if it was simple interest is on that £10,000, you would get 5% each year, which is £500. So you'd be pretty happy. The second year, you would get another £500. So it's like simple interest. So that means that you get the interest on your original amount. So in year 3, you get another £500. So at the end of 3 years, you have your original £10,000 plus 3 £500 lumps of interest, which obviously then brings you to a grand total of £11,500. Now, compound interest, which is what happens generally in the real world, is that you would get the 5% on the original amount and the interest that you'd already received. So it means in year 1 you'd get 5% of 10,000, so you get £500. But you would then in year 2 get 5% on the 10,500 that was now in your account. So you get a bit more interest, and then the next year you get a bit more interest again. What it means is your first in 3 years, rather than having 3 payments of £500, you'd have the first year you get £500, the second year you get £525 interest, and the third year you get £551 interest. So you see where this is going. Even just after 3 years, in that example, you would have around about £76 more than just the simple interest example. So that's the power of compound interest, and it's one of those things to always bear in mind. Now, the reason why it's interesting is because it grows and it accelerates over time. Now, the rule of 72 is something we've mentioned probably a few years ago, or you can call it the rule of 70. And it's a very neat way to work out how long it would take to double your money given a certain interest rate you received. But it takes account of compounding. So, for example, let's go back to that previous case. We said we had £10,000. Now, if we were getting paid 5% a year compound interest, then how long would that take for us to end up with £20,000 in our account? Now, the rule of 72, or let's just say 70 because it's just easier to work out, all you have to do is take the interest rate and divide it into the number 70. So in our case, it was 5% a year. Divide that into 70, which goes in 14 times, if my maths is correct, Andy, which means that it would take you exactly 14 years with that interest rate to grow your money from £10,000 to £20,000. Now, that just shows you not only a quick way to work out compound interest, but also the power of it, because most people wouldn't think that they, with just 5% a year, that they would only take them 14 years. What they would do is they would divide it by 5%. That would take about, 20 years to get double your money. But actually, you end up getting quicker and quicker. So in that case, that we said, it would only take you 14 years. So that's the wonders of compound interest that make the world go round. Now, the other reason why it's important, it's not just in savings accounts, it also works in the investment world. So if you invest in stocks, or say the FTSE 100. Now, the FTSE 100, all those stocks will usually pay a dividend. So think of it like an income. And that income you can have reinvested back into your FTSE tracker or whatever it is you've got. And so that ends up having a compounding effect. Now, to give you an example, if you'd invested £1,000 back when the FTSE 100 was first created, which was 1984, then if you had just had the capital growth of your money, so just the share price rises of that £1,000, ignoring any income that would be paid, let's pretend they didn't pay any income, or you actually took the income, didn't reinvest it, then your capital sum at the end, or today, so some 30 odd years later, would be £5,096. Whereas if all those dividends, those small dividends you would have got paid by that FTSE 100 portfolio, if you'd kept reinvesting each year to buy more stocks, then your £1,000, rather than being worth £5,096, it would be worth £17,334, which is a huge difference. Now, of course, before people shout at me while they're listening, if you'd taken the income, then you, of course, would have had £5,000 in the first example, plus you'd have had income every year. Now, realistically, the FTSE only has a yield of somewhere between 3 and 5%. It does vary, but if you multiply that up, it's only going to be an extra few £1,000s on top of that. So the point is that it is hugely beneficial to keep compounding your money, which is why it's about the length of time you are in the market, which is important, rather than necessarily trying to time the market, because it's that compounding effect is if you start gaining momentum with your investments, that your pot grows and grows. So hopefully, thanks to Gavin, people realise the power of compound investing, and actually just a bit of patience, because that snowball can grow very quickly, and of course once it gets to a certain size it grows very, very, very quickly. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Right, Damien, I'm ashamed to admit that we're on to probably my favourite part of any podcast, and that's where we talk about scams. What do we got on this bit?
The scam section, we should almost name it. But this is something that came about on social media, because it is actually about social media, which, given the prevalence of social media in our lives, then it is a particularly important one for us to bear in mind. But what normally happens when somebody is a bit upset with their energy company, or anybody for that matter, bank, they often will take to social media to berate them and become really upset and write sort of things about them, tag them in their posts and try and get it shared, etc., etc. Now, there is a problem with doing that, and the problem is you can actually be setting yourself up to be a victim of fraud, basically be scammed. Now, while you may be getting the company's attention, who, let's just say it's your bank, who you are upset with, due to some sort of service or lack of service, what you're actually doing is publicly stating to the world, I bank with, let's say, NatWest, and that is a piece of information that a scammer, that's all they need to therefore be able to set you up. And there was a case where a lady who actually was one of the people who flagged this on social media had berated her bank, and a fraudster then eventually got in contact with her, posing as her bank to try and resolve the problem, and used it as a method to extract information from her. So if you're broadcasting to the world you're upset with your bank, then you are in a way expecting them to respond, because that's why you're doing it. And of course, if somebody calls you out the blue or somehow contacts you and pretends to be from your bank, which isn't particularly hard, then you're probably going to be more susceptible, thinking, I've got their attention, and off you go. Well, she did that, and she lost quite a bit of money as a result, because she'd therefore given her details to her bank. And don't forget that banks aren't particularly good at recovering any money that's lost in a fraud if you give people your information willingly, and often they probably won't even do anything about it because they deem it as your fault. So the message is really be careful when you go online. Now, probably about 7 years ago, at the early stages of Money to the Masses, we looked on a page for, it was First Direct at the time, and they massively went into social media. They're very good on it, and they're a very popular bank. And we went to as an exercise once and looked at the people who were liking First Direct and sharing some of their fun content and writing messages. And then as a post for Money to the Masses, we just highlighted how much information you could get from people online, not by contacting them, but because they had open profiles. And so you could go through and see people's dates of birth, when they got married, work out their spouse's name. That's not being particularly clever. You can just see that information. Of course, if you know where someone banks, the problem is that a lot of their passwords and security stuff often has some relevance to themselves. So people change their PIN number to their date of birth or something like that, which is quite popular. So we wrote the post just to highlight to people how easy it is just to take bits of information that's out there and piece them together. And of course, fraudsters have the time and inclination to do this. It's a bit like the old days where people used to go through your dustbins to get your credit card statements and information, which I'm presuming they still do to a certain extent. But it's just a warning. Be careful with what you share. Now, I'm not up to date on all the privacy settings on Facebook, if there are any now, bearing in mind what's been happening with Mark Zuckerberg, but they're constantly changing them, so I don't know how much you can see and can't see, and open profiles, etc. But it's just be aware that little bits of information, when you start celebrating and sharing pictures of your birthday, today's my birthday, blah blah blah, that's just enough. The one thing, if you are really miffed, therefore, with your bank or whoever it is and you're making a complaint, then rather than try and use people power as such online with social media, have a look at Resolver, which is a company that was started by a guy who was fed up, I think, with his bank and the response he got. And what it does, it pulls together people's complaints. It allows you, gives you templates, takes you through the complaints process. And I think I'm still correct in saying that Martin Lewis took a stake in the company. It's heavily promoted by Money Saving Expert. They're actually, I think, technically tied up in terms of technology in the background when they encourage people to make complaints or help them with their complaints. So what happens is you register with them. There are lots of free templates you can download. They take you through the complaints process. And in the early days, which I'm sure it's probably still a lot like this, they helped push it all through, because they would shove all these complaints to various companies which are legally bound to obviously respond to complaints if they're covered by various ombudsmen. So, for example, Andy, we know in the world of finance there's very strict time frames which they have to respond all these things before they can be referred to the ombudsman if you're still not happy with how they've handled your complaint. So they push that all through with you. So it's really meant to make complaining very slick, very easy, and to get it to the right people in the right companies. It is free to use, which is obviously very good. How do they make money? Well, they actually make money by encouraging the companies who everyone's complaining to use the Resolver service to improve their customer service. And they also use the insights from the data that they have from all of you. They don't give you, apparently you don't send out personal data or anything like that. They're just the sort of anonymous insights. They use that data, which they obviously make money from when they're dealing with these companies. So It's a nice idea. I've not used it. There's a lot on there for PPI. If you've not done PPI stuff, like I said, it's free. So rather than name and shame on social media, perhaps you'd be better off using something like Resolver.
Good. Okay, so managing financial goals. That's what we've got coming up next.
Before we do that, Andy, just a couple of pieces I just want to throw out there. Now, Richard Bowman contacted me via Facebook on our Facebook page. And you like golf, Andy, don't you? I know you like golf because when I came on to record the podcast with you, you were watching the Masters and I could hear it in the background.
Couldn't find the mute button quick enough.
Yeah, so the golf. Now, I just thought this was funny, and it's just a kind of FYI to laugh at, I suppose. Right, you probably remember that I think it was last week we did a piece on travel insurance and checking what your policy did and didn't cover. Now, Richard contacted me via Facebook, and I'm guessing he must have done this because he sent me a screenshot and said, "Who has ever heard of hole-in-one insurance?" Now, on this policy document for a travel insurance policy, it goes down all the different things it covers. Now, there's obviously a section for sport, and in particular relating to golf. So if your golf clubs get lost, it tells you how much it will pay out. If your golf clubs don't arrive with you when you're flying, there's an amount. But there's also hole-in-one insurance, which I had never heard of. And when Richard showed me, I did actually laugh at that. So there you go. It's another one to add to the list. Who would have thought there were some very bizarre things covered? Right, on to the next thing. Quickly before we go on to the how to manage financial goals, I meant to mention previously, I did a update on 80/20 Investor for the Perfect ISA portfolio. Now, the Perfect ISA portfolio was something I did about 2-3 years ago. I did a piece of research and just thought, look, let's try and create something that never lost money. So could we have, if we started off with a stocks and shares ISA and we could hold any asset, whether it's cash, whether it's equities or American equities, US, any asset, whatever. Is there a combination of those things that meant that you had never lost money in a given tax year? That's not to say it hasn't gone up and down in that tax year, but just saying when you looked at the beginning to end of each tax year since ISAs came in the year 2000, had they always been in profit? And was there an allocation, that same allocation that meant you also beat a FTSE tracker, 100 tracker over the entire period? So that's going like 17, 18 years. Well, I updated that piece of research, and it has happened for the years until I created the research about 2-3 years ago. In the intervening years, is that the portfolio's also made money. So it was a bit of fun, but it actually showed gave a bit of insight into the asset allocation that you would perhaps have that is less volatile but has been making money year on year. Now, just to throw it out there, it's actually quite heavily skewed towards a certain type of bonds, because obviously there has been a bull bond market as well as a bull equity market. The bond bull market has been going for about 30 years, so that's a bit of a clue. I updated it this week for the current tax year, or the one that just finished, and it was within a whisker. It was on the balance of whether it was going to end up making money or not, and we were talking like fractions of a percent. It had been down about 2 or 3% until a couple of weeks ago, and all this chaos actually was in its favour. So go and have a look at that if you're an 80/20 investor. If you're not, you can take out a free trial and have a look. Right, financial goals, Andy. I'm conscious of the time, but I don't want to overly rush this piece. Now, I was asked the question by a lady called Sarah, and I'll just read it out roughly. They wanted to suggest a topic for the podcast. Anyone can do that. Just contact me or Andy. And they said they wanted to know how to manage financial goals. So they are trying to save for retirement as they're in their 40s and have very little saved in pensions. But they also want to have a normal life, not extravagant. They don't go shopping each month, nor do they drive lease cars. It's hard not to feel guilty all the time. Guilty in the short term if we spend more on a holiday than planned, or spent more in a month than had been budgeted. Guilty also in the long term, as even though saving, we still don't think we're doing enough. Now, when they say saving, they mean stocks and shares. So Sarah actually says she thinks there'd be more fun topics to talk about, but it's quite relevant. And the reason I just wanted to pick up this topic is because in the office the other day I was discussing the idea about goals. And in the world of finance, we just obsess about stock markets. So we'll look at it and go, oh yeah, we made 10% this year, or if you last year could have made even more where the market was so good, or this year we lost 10% or 5%, and how much people are putting into their pension pots. Now, taking the step away from Sarah's particular case, what we need to do, and I wish the world of finance did a bit more, was start with the end goal, decide what this retirement looks like, be very realistic about what it's going to be, and then work backwards. And work out how much money you're going to need for that retirement, okay? Then work backwards to today's date, how many years you've got left, and then how much money you've got at the moment you put aside, and then work out the compound interest in effect, or the rate you need to achieve to actually end up with the pot of gold that you need to be able to have the retirement or whatever it is that you want. Now, if you have something too high, then you're going to have to take a lot of risk or put more money in. Now, the reason that I like the idea of working backwards is that you should be able to draw a relatively straight line. So let's say you needed 5% a year return. That's quite low, but let's be honest, equities don't give you much more than that on average. Then you would draw that straight line, and you would, on a graph, so if there was a graph where on the y-axis there was how much money you had in your pot, whatever it be, pension, ISA, bank account, along the x-axis is time, then there'd be a diagonal line slowly going up. That is like your benchmark. So when you invest, and you therefore your value of your pot goes up and down, when you get a bump a year and you fly up and you maybe made 20% and you think this world is wonderful, I'm a genius, all you've got to focus on is, are you above or below where that line is? So at this given point in time, with the power of compounding, let's just say your pot should have been at about £50,000 or something like that, given your 5% a year growth, then you just need to worry if you're above or below it. What it does is, if you focus on that and you're way above it, you just ignore the sort of almost, it's because it's paper. It's a paper gain, isn't it? And so you sort of can overlook that and just think, well, I'm on track. And the positive about doing that, and when I would try, and if I was to have clients and teach them, is because it focuses on what you'll need to do. And it's a bit like you're trying to travel from London to Edinburgh, and you're going and you've worked out your most direct route. And it's kind of irrelevant what's going on all the side roads or what somebody else is doing. All you're focused on is your straightest line, your straight line to where you want to go, which is that benchmark, that sort of gradually going up, say 5% a year, which if that's a sufficient rate. Of course, by doing that, you don't get carried away with the amount of money you may have made in a very good year, because equally, you're going to have a year where you end up maybe losing 20%. But if your pot is still above that line, am I making sense, Andy? If it's still above that line, you can take that hit. You sit there and go, that is just the ups and downs of the stock market. Equally, if you dip below it, then you're not going to beat yourself up about it. You can just see that this is the trend I need to follow, and I will get back to that. And so what it does is it stops you focusing on the sort of speed of how you get there in terms of the gyration. So on our journey from London to Edinburgh, it's a bit like obsessing about the traffic, how fast you're travelling. So you might have a period where you're going 70, maybe 80, who knows, you might be crazy, where you've got no traffic, and this is like brilliant. But there's going to be a period around the corner where you get the traffic jam. That's the bad year in the stock market. But ultimately, as long as you've got stick to your best route, that is going to get you to where you need to be. And so that's what I think retirement goals are like. So going back to what Sarah said, I would then work out what I needed to generate. Now, if that level was too high, so it was like you need to make 15% a year, obviously you need to take more risk, which you can do. You could get more and more risky investments. But what you probably need to do is combine that goal with a more reserved or more realistic outlook. So rather than having the more lavish lifestyle, you might have to cut back on some of the things you think you might need. And it's incredible that if you start applying that sort of money-saving angle to what your dreams may be, it can make the dream more realistic. Now, I'm going to quickly give you an example. There's a book called The 4-Hour Working Week, which is a very famous book, which was written by a guy called Tim Ferriss. And the idea behind it is that he travels the world, earns ridiculous sums of money, only works 4 hours a week from a business he built himself. And it was all about automating your business. So it's like using computers. I think he ended up selling food supplements. So it's meant to be achievable for anybody. It's an interesting book. There's a whole movement out there, people who do it. It means anybody could end up, he says, working a 4-hour week. And what he does is he actually works back in that. There's a very good bit of financial planning, which I don't think he quite probably realises that's what it is to a certain extent. But he said if you want to drive a Ferrari, be realistic. When you drive a Ferrari, there's only so many days of a year you can drive a Ferrari because the weather or just when you are available to drive a Ferrari. If you buy one, it might cost you... How much does a Ferrari cost, Andy? I have no idea.
I've got no idea either, but I imagine it's somewhere in the region of 200 to 250,000.
Yeah, so to buy that £250,000 Ferrari, you're going to have a lot of money, and then when it sits in your garage for most of the time, it's going to be depreciating, so you're losing money. But also you've got the other costs in terms of insurance and petrol and all that kind of stuff. Yet you could probably hire a Ferrari for maybe... It might be $5,000 for a weekend or a week or whatever, like a decent sum. But when you actually work out how much you need to be able to pull up outside a, restaurant or your friends, or if you go for a weekend away, you can hire nice cars for a more reasonable price than paying £200,000. And by doing that, the lifestyle is what you're after rather than the asset. So stop focusing on the asset. You've got to focus more on what the lifestyle is that you want. And you can actually achieve that by not having the obsession with owning everything. So it may be that when you might still want to go and travel, but the way you travel may be not first class or anything like that. It just may be a bit more realistic about how you do it, but you're still travelling around. So do you get what I mean, Andy? It's about breaking things down and being realistic to, well, I can still do that, but you can do it on a budget. And that's what these scammers actually do, funnily enough. You see some of them, these people who live double lives, end up pulling up in a Ferrari to con people about how wealthy they are when they've just hired it for the day. So anyway, you've got to balance what your retirement income is. You can sit down and work out what your minimum amount you need in retirement, and that can work that back. So your minimum amount on bills, your minimum amount to hire your Ferrari or whatever these things are, and you can work out what that income, and it won't be as much as you think it is, because hopefully you may have paid off your mortgage as well. Now, the other thing is, if you get to the point, you don't want to feel guilty about things. I'm in the same scenario as Sarah, really, because I have children, I've got bills. I don't put enough away for my future, even though I know I should. It's just a realism that I don't have the means as I would want to. But of course, you do end up gaining, and typically you end up having more money as you get older because your kids start to leave home and be able to fund more. When I look at past clients and about how they funded, they tended to really start funding heavily, almost in a panic mode, but it was also because they had more money when they got to their 50s or 60s. It is leaving it a bit late. You're better off starting earlier, of course you are, but there's always still time. The other thing is, I still have this burning, not obsession, but the thing about pensions. Everyone goes on about pensions, and pension is one of the best ways to fund retirement. But in Sarah's case, she's basically saying, I can't build a big enough pot to produce an income. Well, she can carry on working. And I know not everyone wants to, but that's a realism that a lot of us are going to face, that we probably are going to have to carry on working. So why not create something on the side that can end up becoming what you do for a living? So something you like, a hobby. If you imagine a hobby, you can very easily turn a hobby that you love into making you an extra 20, 30 quid a month. That soon becomes 40, 50, 100, 200, 300, and before you know it, you have what they call a side hustle, a side business that you actually might be really enjoying, but will slowly make income. Now, you shouldn't rush it. Go into something without trying to make money. Eventually, if it's good what you do, the money will come. And I'm not just saying this in a sort of dreamlike state. This is what Money to the Masses effectively became. Money to the Masses was started by me just doing something I was passionate about, and it's now a business and that I run and have people working with me, like my brother, and it's what I do and it's what I love, but it also does feed my kids. So you can do things that you really like and love, and things that don't have to be you trying to screw people over or anything like that. You can be something you really want to do and you can make money, but start early, because it can take you 10 years before you're making any sort of income stream, but that's fine if you're not in a rush. So I would also say try and do that. Don't beat yourself up about your financial goals, because you have to also realise how resourceful we are. As humans, we're very, very, very resourceful. If you don't have any money, people do find ways to live. So I think people have to realise they are very resourceful. And also, one other quick tidbit I would say is that when you're 90, with the best will in the world, you won't be spending as much money as you will be when you were 60 or when you were 50. It just doesn't happen. When I look at people who in the past who are clients, maybe some will do and have a very long and healthy retirement. But what tends to happen is people start their retirement, spend a lot of money, enjoy themselves, and when they've almost done everything, or their health it deteriorates, because unfortunately that is the realism of retirement, is their health starts to deteriorate, and then their world starts to retract again, and so therefore they start going on holidays that maybe are in the UK, and their spending starts to drop. So that is just being realistic. So you have to factor that in slightly. So you don't need to budget for having, I don't know, whatever the amount of money you want a year forever. You might want it to grow with inflation, so you have to bear that in mind. But I'm just being realistic. Well, I've seen it. That's how it happens. So hopefully I've given Sarah some food for thought there on her achieving financial goals. But it's really, you've got to work backwards from them, alter them, and then just keep a regular check on where you are. If you get that one number, that 5% a year, so you know where you should be, nothing else matters. You don't have to worry about the stock market collapsing. You don't have to worry about the stock market rallying. You just have to focus, am I above or below that? I'm above it. Good. Move on. So there we go, Andy. That is everything, I think, on the podcast.
That's brilliant. I've really enjoyed it this week. Sorry I've been quieter than normal, but you've been explaining things, I've been learning and sitting back and taking note. If you want to get in touch with Damien, of course you can do in the usual way, at Money to the Masses with a number 2. That's Damien's Twitter handle. Of course, you can get in touch via the podcast and via Damien's personal email address if you've got something, any feedback or subjects you want covered. So that is podcast@moneytothemasses.com, or of course Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Damien, we're done.
We're done, Andy. So until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.